एक बात बता, 2-3 बटन बनाने के तुझे कोई क्यों पैसे देगा? इतनी बढ़िया सैलरी मिलती है कोडर्स और डेवलपर्स को, तुझे फालतू का रिस्क उठाना क्यों है?
बट मुझे अब पता है क्या करना है।
क्या फ्रीलांस?
नहीं, मैं सोच रहा हूँ एक वेबसाइट बनाऊं अपनी खुद की।
कौन सा प्राइस? कॉन्ट्रैक्ट साइन किया है क्या मैंने? कोई पता नहीं कहां से आ जाती है ये डिजाइनिंग करने।
It doesn't matter what softwares you know today, because with time, every technical skill gets outdated. What truly stays with you are the core principles, your mindset, and the way you think about your subject. Welcome to the Foundations for UX Design, a 15-episode series that will take you through all the important lessons and realizations I've had so far as a self-taught UX designer. My name is Ansh Mehra and I am a product designer and storyteller at Zuddle.com, which is a virtual events hosting platform. In this session, we will be learning some of the most common mistakes students make when they begin their career as a UX designer. I hope you've seen all videos from the series preceding this episode. With that being said, I hope you enjoy this session. So without wasting any further time, let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to lecture 4. I'm super happy that you've made to this point. Today we're going to talk about all the necessary steps that you should definitely take when you get a new UX project. Now you could be working at your company, you could be the only designer at your startup, could be a freelance gig, or it could even be your personal project. There are a bunch of things that you really have to take care of before you even start solving your problems. What are the questions you have to ask? How do you structure your energy? How do you approach that specific problem? So I'm going to share you some things that I do, some things that I've learned from other people, seniors, mentors, books, references, articles, and some things that I have discovered from my own personal experience. Now, I'm going to assume that you've seen my first 3 episodes from this specific series and you've completed all the Figma playlists that I've mentioned so far. So the first one would be the Getting Started playlist. The second one would be the New Features playlist. And if you've been working super hard, then I would be really impressed if you are regularly watching the Office Hours playlist. But if you haven't, that's completely alright. You can finish the entire series after you watch this video. And in the end, I hope that you're taking care of your mind and your body, because all of this is extremely redundant and useless if you're not taking care of your mind and your body. Now the question is, why would someone pay you to solve problems? There are so many people who say that they can solve, they can design and do a bunch of things. Well, the most common answer is that you can help solve difficult problems. I mean, that is what you would try to do. People would pay you only if you are better at solving problems or faster at solving problems. Otherwise, they would have done it themselves, but they want you to join in, give them a set of new lenses, new perceptions, new perspectives, new wayouts, new loopholes, so that whatever money that they're investing in their idea is safeguarded and it's error proof. The second most important thing is that whatever solution that you put, it's not supposed to be an ad hoc solution. It's not supposed to be a plug that would fix the current situation, but it's also a solution that scales with time. So no matter whatever edge cases come, no matter how you scale the software, in most cases your solution would still work in the longer run. And you can do it conveniently with the minimum amount of resources. So it's not like you need 10 different developers and 150 days to research, maybe go to a different continent and do all these things. But you can sit on your table, do your magic, and come up with really interesting solutions without asking too many weird questions. You ask questions properly, you have the patience to understand what is the context, and you are easy to work with. And in the end, you can help them focus on other things. Because if a co-founder or if a product manager or if an entrepreneur has come to you to design an application, it's usually because they don't want to design it themselves. They want to focus on other things. So your job is to make sure that they feel confident trusting you. Now we will visualize a very basic scenario, because this is a super basic playlist, and I want you guys to just understand the essence and not take my words literally. The scenario is that you are a beginner designer who's working on a UX contract and you're the only designer working, so you don't have a proper designer to give you feedback, there are no people to help you out, you only have the internet, and the client has no understanding of UX. They kind of have the ability to recognize good design, they are really good at pointing out problems, but they are really bad at giving you practical feedback. Now let's pick a problem statement. The client says we need a live stream chat user interface, and it's a web app, and we might have a mobile app in the future, but right now it's going to open on your laptop screens, and that's all. It's a 5-minute conversation, you got the idea, they have some flowcharts, they have some references, but overall this is the brief that they give you. Now reality check, if your client is not from a typical product background, or if that client is just entering, and this is the usual case in all these scenarios, in these freelance contracts, that the brief is always going to be incomplete. You are paid to fill in the gaps. So if you are one of those people who would get a brief, design something, and then say to the client that, hey, this is what I've come up with, and the client says, hey, wait, this is not what I expected, but you would say that, hey, I asked you if you wanted this and you only mentioned these 4 or 5 points, and I've written all these things here, and this is the design that I've come up with, so pay me the full money. You're in for a horrible joyride, because you are literally paid to ask more questions and show them what they do not know. So before solving that question, once you get the brief, you need to have a plan of action. So before you even go on Figma and start designing, you have to make sure that all stakeholders that are involved in this one particular project or in this one particular release are involved in that first long meeting. Every time you design something new, there's this really long meeting that happens where all important people are supposed to be there. So in a lot of cases, you might be working with a product manager, but if you feel that the co-founder needs to be there, or if the founder needs to be there, or if another product manager needs to be there, or a specific developer needs to be there, bring them on the call. Don't have conversations without all the proper necessary stakeholders in this specific conversation. And ask more questions, and ask questions from each and every stakeholder, because they never tell you everything. They have a bunch of fuzzy thoughts in their heads, and as a designer, it's your responsibility to make sure that you ask questions and unravel. So the core intention here is to make sure that you are visualizing a solution. Your client and all the other stakeholders are also visualizing a solution. Of course, there's a huge chance that what they're visualizing is absolutely incorrect. But in the beginning, you have to make sure that you are closest. You try as much as you can to just get closest to their vision, what they are expecting from you. And you can only do that when you ask really, really detailed and specific questions. And you have to write all these answers down. I see a lot of people just listening to these answers, but the point is, I would strongly recommend you guys to maybe use a recording application, maybe use, there are many applications that actually come on your Google Meets call as a note taker, and they would record the entire application. Otherwise, you can just make notes in your notebook or document it on Notion, and whatever notes that you make, update it on a Slack channel. So if your organization has a Slack channel, great. If your client doesn't have a Slack channel, you as a freelancer should have your own Slack directory where you can add clients. So you can use Slack Connect to just add that one specific person to that one channel and have all your communication there. But it's really important to keep track of these conversations, because you will have a bunch of meetings. And if you don't keep track of all these points, there's no proof of that conversation. There are no minutes to go back to. So it's important for you as well as the person that you're working for. After you've asked all these questions, all the basic questions, you have to take charge of your inventory. Now, what do I mean? What is your inventory as a designer? Firstly, the time. When do they need the final draft? Now, the amount of time is very subjective for each of these problem statements, because some problems can be really, really complex. But on the other hand, you have a deadline. You're saying that I want an MVP within the next 30 days. So you have to ask whoever it is that you're working for, or whatever problem statement that you're solving, that fine, I get that you have this really, really big vision, but can you tell me the time under which you want these things to complete? And then you have to analyze, do I have enough time to do this properly, to solve this entire problem statement properly? Yes, awesome. No, then you have to break that problem into segments or maybe phases where you say that, hey, in V1 we release this, in V2 we release this, in V3 we release this. And that is the way that you can structure your time. So ask how much time do they need, how much time would the developers need, right? So the next question is resources. How many developers are required to pull this off, and how many developers do you have? So if you have 3 developers, you know that you have ample of development bandwidth to get your designs converted into proper functioning code. But if you only have 1 dev, that tells you that please don't go too fancy on the visual design aspect. Please make it extremely functional. Then even within a specific developer bandwidth, how much effort it takes to make these components. In a lot of MVPs, people simply use bootstrap components, right? They would simply pick stuff from already existing open source libraries. So if the time constraint is very, very short, don't try too much of fancy stuff. Just stick to the basics, right? It's completely all right, because in the beginning, for every single product, it's really important to generate revenue. And when it comes to revenue, functional design is much more important than aesthetic design. So if you can create something that works really well, which is developed on time, pushed on time, and it comes to the consumers on time, that is better than unnecessarily making things complicated. And then you have to ask each and every stakeholder, what is the priority at this stage? Is it functionality? Is it aesthetics? Or is it both? If it is only functionality, then you know what to focus on. If it's only aesthetics, which should never be the case, you correct them that please, I get it that you need the aesthetic vibe and everything. If you want the aesthetics, then have 2 developers on board. But your first priority should always be the functional aspect of it, because with time, you will get a lot of chances to fix the visual aspect of it. And then ask them, where does this fit in, right? So when you are listening to a specific solution, ask them what comes before this solution. What happens before this live stream chat? Why would I read this live stream chat? Is it necessary to make this chat visible at all times? Is there any way that you can close this chat? Is there any way you can come back to this chat? All these questions. Because when people give you a problem statement, they are narrowing their vision down. They're only looking at this one single frame. But in reality, when we talk about a flow is a stream of events. It's a chain of events. When you get a brief, you only get one single event from that entire chain. So as a designer, you have to understand what comes before this segment and what will come after this segment. Now, I would strongly recommend you to teach each and every stakeholder how Figma works. And it's not like you have to teach them how to edit on Figma, but basically just tell them how to comment on Figma, how to open Figma files. Tell them about components, tell them about styles. A lot of freelance employers, they know what Figma is, but they don't really leverage all the important features. So first of all, teach your stakeholders how Figma works and establish a system for organizing your files, because if you don't organize your files properly, the handoff that you have, the entire process of you communicating your designs to your developer will become really messy. So no matter how hard you work, in the end, if it's not reaching to the developers, if it is not communicated properly, easily, in a modular fashion, your designs will never reach that optimum stage. You know, the way that you visualize them, you will never have them that way. So the entire process of an idea being designed and brainstormed and developed and tested, everything relies on collaboration. You cannot achieve anything great alone. And collaboration is heavily influenced by your ability to explain things properly and the quality of conversations that you have in between all these stakeholders. Now, if your files are not organized well, almost every stakeholder would have their own vision, and almost every stakeholder would have that fear of going through the Figma files, have that fear of asking questions, because when they look at your work, they'll be like, this is too complicated for me to even ask, right? But when you put things in order, when you clean your things up, it's easy for people to ask you questions, and you want them to ask you questions. So I've written 3 Medium articles, and I'll put the link in the description. They're very, very detailed, very practical Medium articles. And one of them is based on organizing your Figma pages using hierarchical header components. So it's a great way that I've been using at Zaddle, and it has really, really helped me. So I would strongly recommend you guys to check it out. Then once you have taken charge of your inventory, once you know the context, it's time to collect inspiration. Never, ever, ever. Like, I can't even, there's no way that I can overestimate this. Please don't design without collecting inspiration. It is too important, because in most cases, whatever problem that you're solving, some human being on some other point on this planet has solved a similar problem. So avoid reinventing the wheel. And it's not like you need to copy their designs, but you should always take clues and inspiration, because UX, like the fundamentals of UX, are visible in almost every single application that we use, but you have to uncover these resemblances. You have to uncover these principles hidden in plain sight, because you can't really instantly pick the laws of UX that are being used in a screen. You have to observe closely as to what is even happening, right? So you have to break down each inspiration in detail. That's very, very important. And for example, so there are 4 or 5 websites that I regularly use to collect inspiration, and I would recommend you guys to check these out. So first is UI Sources, that's by Abhinav. Great website. Then there's mobin.design, there's uigarage.net, screenlane.com. And then this is not for collecting like visual design inspiration, but there's a website called growth.design, and I would recommend you to read every single case study there and make notes of it. Go through the entire website. It is impeccable. Like, there's nothing as cool as growth.design, and I would strongly recommend you guys to read this regularly and just subscribe to their mailing list. Also, let's just try to understand the process of collecting inspiration, that once you go to these websites, how do you collect inspiration and how do you break it down? So a quick shortcut that I regularly use on the Mac, it's Command-Shift-4. When you hold Command-Shift-4, for example, if I take a screenshot of this thing and hold the Control key, it would actually copy that screenshot on my clipboard. So it doesn't go to my desktop. I can just instantly do, say, Command-V, and it would paste it here. So it just saves a lot of time. Otherwise, the entire desktop is just cluttered with a bunch of screenshots, and it just becomes too messy that every time you take a screenshot, you have to open desktop, copy it into your Notion document, all these things. So what you can do is have a Notion document where you collect all your inspiration and, just keep adding screenshots. So I have shared my entire Notion documentation process on Graphy. I've done a course. I'll talk about the course in the end as well. So there I have shown people in detail as to how do I manage all my inspirations, how do I collect them. So in my Notion document, I have this page called Marketing Inspiration, and within Marketing Inspiration, I would have visuals, text, illustration, copywriting, animation, click states, hover states, all these different sub pages. And within those sub pages, I would have a heading, then a link to that website and a screenshot, so that I can have all my inspirations in place. And then you can have a separate page in your project. Actually, before you even start designing, have a Figma page for your inspiration and keep pasting these screenshots, and use flow kits and annotation cards. So flow kits are basically arrows and a bunch of things actually. And I would recommend you to go to Figma community and check out this file called annotation cards with team members. And it's a brilliant file, and I'll show you how it works. So for example, this is a screenshot or component that I've taken from a website. What I would do is I would use these annotation cards, and even other design team members have their own annotation cards. So I would write, what do I like about this? And I would also write, what do I not like about this? So basically, it's not just me putting my inspiration, like a bunch of stickers or images scattered around. I'm also breaking down what I like and I do not like. And when you type things down, you give structure to your thoughts, which is really, really important. Now, 3 really, really cool Figma files that I would recommend you guys is one of these is the UX toolset, then the Annotation Kit 2.0, and Feedback Kit. So Feedback Kit, Annotation Kit 2.0, these are by Mixpanel, and UX toolset has a paid version as well as a demo version. So if you want, you can definitely invest in the paid one, but if you don't want to invest, if you just want to try, they also have a demo version. So it's a really, really valuable kit. It just helps you collect your inspiration, explain your flows properly. You'll understand when you open these files, you'll instantly understand their use case. But what my intent here is to introduce you to the power of Figma community, introduce you to all these free resources, open source resources that you can use to just accelerate your progress and bring all your stakeholders on board. Now, in most cases, you'll have around 3 days, because unaware clients are usually impatient and they need the first draft within 3 days. They'll be like, yeah, we want to see like our live stream chat UI's first draft in like, say, Friday or something like that. So you need to have that ability where you know that, oh, you don't panic. First of all, you don't get pressurized. You're like, fine, I understand this is an iterative process. In the next 3 days, I can give them some direction. I can give them some clues. And then once we have our second call, I can get more insight and get more feedback if I'm closer to their vision or if I'm getting away from their vision. And actual projects are much more complex than a live stream UI. This is a very, very basic example. And there's a long journey after the first draft. So it just begins with the first iteration. Now, after this entire basic drama, you have to allocate your time and energy, because you know that, oh, I have 3 days to come up with the first draft. So this entire allocation is extremely subjective. So for me, I would constantly collect inspiration. And while I'm collecting inspiration, I would start picking stuff and start designing from the get-go. And then I would have these different components and different areas, and I would just plug them together like, you know, Lego sets. Like I would just plug and play different items. So it's a very subjective process, but you have to split this time, because a lot of people feel that they have a lot of time, but they spend too much time on the inspiration part of it, or maybe they spend too much time designing but very less amount of time on the inspiration. But when you truly set guidelines for yourself, when you have a proper tight schedule, you know how much time do I have for inspiration, how much time do I have for the prototyping, how much time do I have for the visual design, so and so forth. So you get the point. And make sure that you have defined the problem correctly. In most cases, when you get a brief, the brief is usually a mix of the problem and the assumed solution. So the problem might be that, hey, we want people to know what is happening on their live stream. That's why we need a live stream chat. But then, are there any more problems? Do you feel that the user is just not aware of the audience? Do you feel that the user is distracted from whatever is happening on the live chat? Do you think that this is the right solution? So you have to understand, are you looking at the problem from the right lens? Are you actually defining the problem in the correct manner? Now we will have sessions which would go really deep into this entire subject, because this is a very, very complex and a very subjective topic as to which solution is the best solution. But there are always different ways to make sure that what you think is fact and not fiction. What you think is not based on assumptions about the user, because in a lot of cases, what you think is completely different from what the users really need. In a lot of cases, even the users would not know what they need. The users are also extremely unaware. They're like, yeah, maybe if this button was red, things would be easier. But turns out you never needed a button. That's the solution. But they felt that if the button was red, it would fix these things. So don't really rely on the user's feedback alone. You have to figure out, you have to really go dig deep into the problem. And that is a practice that you can look up to. But just giving you some pointers, like these are the steps that I follow. Now, let's write our checklist. I said that you would have to figure out a way to allocate your time. But how do I start designing? Now, you begin with a rough structure and a rough visual design, and you have a bunch of ideas. You're like, maybe I can use this color, maybe I can use the border radius and all these things. Now, you can only ask these questions when there is no system established. So when you're the proper first designer of the company, in most cases, you don't have a system. So I'm going to come back to the previous slide, and let's just keep the system on the side. But the usual order is that you would come up with a rough visual design and then figure out the interactions, right? So you have this one core button, and then this one core button is basically your general state button, like unclick button. But then on the software, you would have to tell the developer what happens when you click, when you hover, when it's disabled, when it's loading, all these different interactions. Then you come to the edge cases. What happens if this input field is empty, filled, extreme case? When the CTA text is too long, when the CTA text is too short, when you have an icon, all these edge cases. So there's an order in which you approach these things, and you don't approach them at once. It's not like on day one you have to figure these things. On day one, you just have to come up with the problem solving part of it, the rough structure part of it, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Then you move to the interaction states, then you move to the edge cases, and then you explore how it scales across different devices. So if you're planning to put it on the iPad, if you're trying to put it on the iPhone or whatever phone, you figure out how that thing scales. So the constraints part comes into the picture then. It's very, very important that you have a detailed feedback loop between each of these steps. So it's not like you start making the rough structure and then you're like, yeah, the clients are going to love this. Let me just go ahead and make the edge cases. Let me make the hover state, click state, disable state. It's a waste of your time. I'm telling you, it's a waste of your time. I know that you're super excited and you want to make the entire design system on day one. Please don't do it. It's going to be a waste of your time. Now, the proper way to do these things is not like I would just open my Figma page and start making buttons. You need to know what are my UI colors, what is the typography that you guys use, what are the icon sets that you guys use. And if your client has never heard about these things, it is your responsibility to tell them that, hey, before even starting any of this, we have to define some guidelines. Let's make the entire button UI, everything can come 15 days later, but we have to sit down and understand what are the colors, what is the language, what is the vibe that you're trying to give to this entire application, what are the different text sizes that you're planning to keep, because you can never go below 12 pixels. Are you crossing the accessibility ratios? Now I know these things sound very, very intimidating, and if you've seen the first 3 episodes, if you've seen the Figma playlist, this wouldn't be very intimidating for you. But if you've done that till now, I would recommend you guys to have more patience. We will cover these things in detail one by one. Right now, for this one single episode, I just want to give you some pointers so that you can research on all these things before the next session. I want you guys to go on Google and figure out how these things are working. I don't want to spoon feed you everything, right? You're self-taught designers. You have to learn how to figure it out. So once your basic system is done, your colors, typography, your icons, your shadows, the border radius, these basic things, now you can start making the components, because you don't want to make a bunch of live chat UI text fields and all these things, and then 4 or 5 months later from now they're like, we're changing the fonts, we're changing the colors and all these things. It's going to be a waste of your time. So don't let them do that. The next thing is, how much space do I get for this chat UI? Like, you have a big screen, right? So what is the space that we're willing to give this? Is this always visible? Is this collapsible? How does this come in? How does this go out? Right? You have to understand these things, because if it's a pop-up, then you have to make sure that the visual design is really, really fancy. But if it's something that stays there forever, it has to be subtle. It has to be prominent. It has to be legible, but it's not supposed to compete for too much attention. So you have to understand how is it positioned on the digital real estate. Now, don't make components in the initial explorations, because I feel that it's sort of like a waste of time. But if you're one of those people who make a component and then you make different variations, by switching colors on and off for different sizes and all those things, you can do that. But I usually stay away from making components unless we are done with our maybe the 3rd meeting or the 4th meeting. And right now, all you have to do is figure out different skeletons and hierarchies. Now, what do I mean by hierarchies? It's basically just figuring out, in that one specific frame that I'm designing, what is more important? What do I give the maximum weight? What do I give the maximum attention? Right? That hierarchy, that visual hierarchy is really, really important. So once you're done with your visual draft, take feedback, document that feedback, and confirm if you and everyone else are on the same page. And then go and make different variants of your component. And when I say variants, I'm talking about like Figma components and Figma variants. So you're done with your buttons, and now you make the default, the click, the disable and hover. And the next session is going to go deep into all these things. Like, we'll do proper hands-on exercises for all of these things. So don't worry. But yes, after the 2nd or 3rd call, you can go ahead and make your components and your variants. And once those are logged, then figure out the interactions. What happens when I click? Is there a pulsating animation? Do the icons go inside? Is there something that I can do? And involve your developers in these conversations, specifically when it comes to interactions, because you want to make sure that there's not too much of development effort. So there are a bunch of open source CSS libraries where you have a lot of good animations. So it's not necessary for you to come up with crazy ideas for animations. You can simply pick one of those open source CSS files, include them in your platform, and just go ahead with it. Just push it. Like, you don't have to go too detailed on that. And then explore how it would scale across different devices. Now, this is easier said than done because we have covered the basic theory. And the next couple of episodes are going to revolve around systems. So whatever theory that we discussed till now, we will actually see how buttons are declared. We will see how input fields are declared or how colors are declared. And then once we are done with these atomic components, we'll figure out how to do the rest of the stuff. So that's a 15 episode series, right? So there's a bunch of exciting stuff lined up for you. But before the next episode, make sure that you're reading, read as many Medium articles as you can. Make sure that you're practicing Figma. Start watching the office hours playlist. Now, each of those videos is going to be around 1 to 2 hours, but I'm telling you, it is worth it. Every single video is worth it. Once you're done with your office hours, eventually finish the in the file videos. So in the file playlist should come at the very end, but first finish your office hours playlist. And if you haven't started already, please begin the 100-day UI challenge. Very simple. You pick a really, really interesting UI image from Behance and Pinterest and simply trace it. It's just to make sure that your gut is being developed when it comes to a visual design sense. Now, I've also designed some really interesting sessions. I've launched them on Graphy by Unacademy. So they are more directed towards hands-on skills. One session is on how can you learn faster and earn faster. One session is on Notion documenting. So I take you through my Notion workspace. How do I organize my documents? How do I use Notion? Just not for like professional purposes, but how do I use it in my own personal life? Like, how does Notion help me get better at what I do? And then I've also done one episode on how to get a design job that pays well. As a beginner, when you're really confused, you don't know how to approach people, you don't know what is expected from you. How do you put yourself out there on the internet so that your chances of getting a good design job are raised? So all of these sessions are available on Graphy. There are many more sessions on Graphy that are in the pipeline. So bunch of exciting stuff there. But those sessions require more energy and more mental attention. Like, you really have to listen to them and do things. So these sessions on YouTube, they're very light-hearted. You can listen and they're very conceptual. But the Graphy sessions are really deep. So yes, link to my Graphy profile is going to be shared in the description. And apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the session. I wanted to keep this within 30 to 35 minutes so that you don't have too many things going on in your head. And yes, if you really like this episode, make sure you subscribe to my channel, you like this video, and you comment your review, because when you comment, I know that this is working for you. YouTube helps me promote my videos only if you truly appreciate by commenting and liking and subscribing. And I would really appreciate if you guys post a review on Instagram. Just tag me on my work account, which is anshmena.design, or tag me on Twitter, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, guys, and keep designing awesome stuff. Bye.
हेलो,
क्या हाल है सर जी?
बस सब मस्त।
हैकाथॉन कैसा रहा? तू तो फर्स्ट टाइम गया था ना किसी हैकाथॉन में?
हाँ भाई, बुरा हाल हो गया मेरा।
क्यों? तेरा काम तो बहुत बढ़िया है।
बढ़िया है, बट मुझे पता चला है कि सोशल मीडिया पर 3-4 स्क्रीन डालने में और एक एक्चुअल प्रोडक्ट शिप करने में कितना फर्क होता है।
मतलब क्या हुआ क्या वहाँ पर?
यार, अभी तक मैं अकेले रूम में बैठकर डिजाइन बना रहा था। अब हैकाथॉन शुरू हुआ तो मुझे लगा कि ऐप के नाम पर ध्यान दो, कलर्स पर ध्यान दो, लॉगिन स्क्रीन पर ध्यान दो। मैंने एक्साइटमेंट के चक्कर में सारा बिगनिंग का टाइम इन्हीं पे खर्च कर दिया।
हाँ, तो ये सब तो अच्छी बात है ना।
अरे बट इस शो शा के चक्कर में मैं भूल ही गया कि एक्चुअली में मैटर क्या करता है। क्योंकि जैसे ही जजेस स्क्रीनिंग के लिए आए, उनके पास 2 मिनट थे। उन्होंने बोला कि ये लॉगिन वॉगिन स्किप करो, ब्रांडिंग से हमें कोई फर्क पड़ता नहीं है। उन्होंने बोला सारे एज केसेस दिखाओ, यूजर फ्लोज दिखाओ, अलग अलग यूज केसेस दिखाओ।
फिर क्या बोला तूने?
फिर क्या, मैं बोला कि मैंने लॉगिन और ब्रांडिंग पर इतना ध्यान दिया है, और मैंने एक बड़ी ना कूल सी इंटरेक्शन बनाई थी, वो भी उन्होंने स्किप कर दी। फिर मुझे रियलाइज हुआ कि मेरी बिगनिंग से ही सारी प्रायोरिटीज गलत है।
ये तो है ब्रो,
मतलब एस्थेटिक और ब्रांडिंग सब बढ़िया है, बट इन द एंड व्हाट काउंट्स इज कि आपकी ऐप अपना काम कर रही है कि नहीं कर रही है। तू और मैं ऐसी कितनी ऐप्स यूज करते हैं जिनकी ब्रांडिंग या यूआई हद से ज्यादा गंदी है, बट वो चलती है एंड एवरीवन इज ओके विद इट।
तो सही कह रहा है यार, मैं अभी तक बस फैंसी यूआई बना के खुश हो रहा था, बट जो असली गेम है ना वो कुछ और ही है।
बट बढ़िया है, इंटरेस्टिंग साउंड कर रहा है। मुझे तो लगता है सिर्फ कोडर्स हैकाथॉन जाते हैं।
नहीं, डिजाइनर्स और कोडर्स दोनों की नीड होती है। एक पर्सन डिजाइन करता है और दूसरा उसको कोड करता है। एक आदमी से सब कुछ थोड़ी ना हो सकता है।
अब क्या प्लान है आगे का?
अपने बबल से बाहर निकलना है यार। अब मैं इस बार तो हार गया, बट मैंने डिसाइड कर लिया है कि अब ये सिर्फ शो के डिजाइन बनाने बंद कर दूंगा। अब एक्चुअल प्रोडक्ट कैसे बनता है, फंक्शनल डिजाइन कैसे बनता है, अब वो सीखूंगा।
get